Namaskar, Nileshok, with another session of Dr. No Shorts. This would be number 14. We are going through super rich archaeology evidence for flooding and destruction of Krishna's Dwarka in 5525 BCE. The evidence seen around the world, and we will continue with this, but I thought I will give you and myself a break from the archaeology evidence for Krishna's Dwarka. But this evidence is also for the same time period, that is for the Mahabharata War itself. And the evidence is so good that in a longer session, I would like to discuss the nuances of this evidence, because its utility, its benefit goes way beyond the dating of Mahabharata, the way beyond the antiquity of Indian civilization. But frankly, a lot of utter nonsense that is being created in the last 300 years or so. This particular evidence, along with, of course, the Indian epics, their dating, decisively falsify all the nonsense that has been created, but it does something more. Because in reality, a lot of foolishness that has been created through academia, okay, using academia as a tool, such as the utter foolishness of Aryan invasion theory, or the stupidity of a Proto-Indo-European language, the language that doesn't exist, but is being proposed as if it existed. And many pro-Indic forces, because of their ignorance, because of their lack of scientific acumen, lack of logical reasoning skills, and inferiority, I guess, or also just not having the required competency, also fight this nonsense, although they don't like it, but they don't know that even some of the parts that they advocate are actually have no basis, no scientific basis, no empirical basis, no logical basis. So all of this evidence, or in fact, the specific evidence I'm going to present today, very well relates to getting rid of this nonsense that is being created over last 300 years or so. Okay, mostly through Western Indology, but frankly, more than them, there are enough of their lackeys in India. But even going further, many in the pro-Indic camp have actually fallen prey to some of these speculative theories, okay, which were purely based on agenda with no empirical proof of any kind. Right at that time, to nip something in the bud, what they ought to have done, or even some of the existing pro-Indic researchers ought to have done the very first time they encountered this, is to apply Hitchens razor. Not only they did not apply Hitchens razor, again because of their lack of scientific acumen, logical reasoning, but indirectly, unconsciously, ignorantly, they embraced some of this foolishness. Okay, so while in a broader brush, they will reject Aryan invasion theory, okay, they may accept Proto-Indo-European, not realizing that they are basically the two faces of the same stupidity. Okay, all right. So let's look at this. Now we are going to look at data from a very hard science of genetics. Keep in mind that this science is evolving over time. We are going to see more precise, more accurate calculations. It's still a long way from it. We will see better resolution of the data as more and more data comes together, the methods improve. Having said that, even with the data that is available to us, frankly, this really took a quantum jump beginning, I would say, mid-80s, the whole science of genetics, and has made significant progress, but still there is a long way to go. But with what is available, you'll be truly impressed what is out there and how it beautifully corroborates the antiquity of Indian civilization, specific event of the Mahabharata War happening in 5561 BC, and a lot more. The outward migrations, out of India migrations, okay, post Mahabharata migrations. There are out of India migrations before Ramayana, from Rigvedic times, Vedic times, before Ramayana, during Ramayana, after Ramayana. There are these migrations before Mahabharat, during Mahabharat, immediately after Mahabharat, all the way to our times. Like someone like me, for example, coming from India to America and so on. All right, let's begin with this. A new word or a term, if you want to remember, I want you to remember, whether you decide to remember or not is your call, is this MDGB. And if you come up with a better nomenclature, do suggest that something maybe easy to remember. My good friend, Dr. Shiva Shastri, is good at that. So if he's watching this, definitely a request to him as well, and we can modify it and do it. But for a lack of creativity on my part, I would say I just simply called it MDGB, not the easiest way to say it. So we will work on this and evolve with a better nomenclature. But MDGB is Mahabharat-driven genetic bottleneck. As I said, I will do a detailed, long episode on this in the Shraddha and Pradnya series, but I thought this is very important and must be circulated in this shorter form of Dr. No Shorts. So what is it? Mahabharat-driven genetic bottleneck. Quickly look at this data set. On the left side, what we have is a Y chromosome. On the right side, we have the mtDNA, which is what matrilineal DNA, the mitochondrial based DNA, okay? Mitochondrial DNA, matrilineal DNA, which is carrying over the signature of the X chromosome along with any mutations. Y chromosomes is related to the transfer from a male to male. I mean, you know, of course, through a baby, so through mother, but it's only, I mean, all men or male have a human, and of course others, but restricted to humans right now, have the Y chromosome. You know, it's a XY combination, whereas among the females is the XX combination. So that's what we are referring to. What do you notice? By the way, this is a modeling exercise. Okay, so I do not want you to focus too much on the absolute magnitudes, absolute numbers, especially on the y-axis. But I want you to focus on these in terms of the relative magnitudes. Okay, because the absolute magnitudes have so many other assumptions that are gone into it. They change with every researcher who uses the initial conditions while building the model. What is critical is that no matter what initial numbers they use, the type of data that they get is very, very consistent. What are we seeing here? So if, oh, by the way, the x-axis is the time, thousands of years ago in the past. So when you see 100, that's 100,000 years ago, 1 lakh years ago. Two vertical lines, distinct lines, the dotted lines, okay? The one is at 50,000 years ago, and another one is at 10,000 years ago in both Y chromosomes and mtDNA. Also notice that these numbers, again, as I already said, that the numbers are relative, okay? So relative to each other, that's what is important to understand. Again, a lot of parameters and initial conditions go into this. They may change. What is important is that you look at the relative differences. So what's the big distinct difference you see over time between Y chromosome and matrilineal chromosome, which is the X chromosome or representation of X chromosome? We'll simply call Y chromosome X chromosome, or Y chromosome versus mtDNA for simplicity. Notice something here. This is the bottleneck that has occurred, okay, in the Y chromosome. Again, this is a short note, so I'm not going to go into the detail. I will cover some of these aspects in the detailed episode in Shraddha and Prajna. But what has happened is that suddenly in the last 10,000 years, there occurred a Y chromosome bottleneck, the male chromosome, you can say, okay? Suddenly a significant variations of the male chromosome came to a standstill. Essentially, many men carrying a Y chromosome, and everyone has some variation, that simply got wiped away. And then there was a recovery over the next thousands of years. It occurred in a different way in different places. The specific year that it happened, now the paper gives you a specific time period. Even then it gives you 7,500 years, by the way. But because I am asserting that this has to do with the Mahabharata War, I'm saying this happened in 5561 BCE. Now, on the other hand, on the female side of chromosome, mtDNA, it was practically unaffected. It was unaffected. Okay, so that's why you don't see any bottleneck there. Now, what caused this? It is my assertion. Of course, these are facts. I mean, no one is denying these facts. Where the difference comes is interpretations. Those people who are not aware of the world history or human history going beyond, say, 2000 years, which is what? Rest of the world, with the exception of India and possibly few places like, say, Egypt. But even there, or if you go to Latin America, that written history is gone. Okay, for most part, it is gone. So it remains as a verbal history. As far as the written, documented history with a stable language like Sanskrit, with a phenomenally sophisticated time measurement such as astronomy is a time, the only place around the world is India. Okay, so when we look at that historical references and try to connect and try to understand, which is what this paper actually says, that this data will be useful, especially when if you start looking at the archaeology evidence. Now, archaeology, they're saying in a generic way, because rest of the world does not have, okay, they do not have access to any history. The history like literally stops for them. Say if you go back 4,000 years max, and after that it's all myth for them. That's not the case for India. For example, we have texts like Mahabharata, Ramayana, Rigveda, Puranas, and goes on and on. So we are going to make, or I did make use of that, and therefore I'm asserting that this bottleneck in the on the male side Y chromosome is due to the Mahabharata War. Okay, you see these different graphs here from different regions of the world, and keep in mind, this is another faulty nomenclature. The area of India, the Indian subcontinent, Hindustan, they call it South Asia, which is again done with an agenda-driven issue. Not that every researcher does it that way, but the individuals who coined the phrase, they did it with agenda. I will not go there again in this short series. So what do we see? I'm asserting that it is driven by this Mahabharata War that occurred in 5561 BCE that caused this Y chromosome, male chromosome bottleneck. So just to understand this, you have to understand who participated in the Mahabharata War to try to connect with those graphs, okay? The South Asia and the specific regions that were affected by this. For example, here, look at the regions, okay? Andes, Siberia, East Asia, which is east of India, you can think of it. Central India is, think of that Uttara Madra, Uttara Kuru, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, and that area. Central, that's Central Asia. South Asia is India, the Indian subcontinent, which is what? Right from Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, Nepal, Tibet. Frankly, parts of Tibet should be considered, okay, which is now, taken over by China. Then Sri Lanka, and even Myanmar, Bangladesh, I think I said it. So that all should be part of the South Asia. And then if you go further east, then that's part of East Asia. Europe, that's in yellow. Okay, we'll look at Europe. as the post-Mahabharata migrations from the Indian area to Central Asia, to Europe, and so on. Near East is basically the Gulf countries, the Middle East, okay? Africa is Africa, and Andes is like South America, and so on, okay? You don't see much data from the Northern America. Again, if I had a time, I would have explained, not in this short series. I'm already at 15 minutes. I'm going to go further and let's see how fast I can finish this. All right. So that's this. I'm asserting this bottleneck is due to the Mahabharata War occurring in 5561 BCE. And I said, to understand this, we have to know who participated in the Mahabharata War quickly. Of course, the entire South Asia, the Indian subcontinent, Hindustan, of course, everyone participated. I mean, all one has to do is read the Mahabharata, okay? Gandhari coming from Gandhar. Now they call it Kandahar, right? But that's Afghanistan, Pakistan. If you look at the many warriors, many kings who fought on the Kaurava side, they came from Iran, Iraq, and as far as Syria and possibly Turkey and so on. Not many people from the Uttara Madra and Uttara Kuru. There were few, like Shalya, for example, we know, but not many from Uttara Madra, Uttara Kuru, which is 40 latitude, the Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, actually actively participated in the Mahabharata War. Again, you have to read Mahabharata to understand why that is so. Rajaswa Yajna and Arjuna is going there, even Arjuna going there after the war to get some wealth and so on. I'll not go there, but they did participate. Some of them would have participated, but many did not participate, sort of a neutral, because they belong to the Kuru dynasty. That's why we call Uttara Kuru. Okay, so both Pandavas and Kauravas are Kuru. Maybe that is the reason they remain neutral. Okay, we don't get very elaborate descriptions, but the limited information we have definitely supports that conjecture. So right from the central, what we call India today, and a broader Bharatavarsha, people participated, everyone participated. The second huge area, especially from a Kaurava side, is people from the Near East. Near East is the word used here, but the Middle East, Iran, Iraq, Syria, Turkey, Jordan, and that whole area. Okay, Oman. I mean, we don't know exactly who's who. For example, I have mentioned that Bhagadatta was from Baghdad and Iraq and so on. On the east side, we have, so if you go beyond, like some Burma, like Brahma, that's a Brahmadesh, right? So that's why I have Burma and now Myanmar. But there, and if you go to Champa Kingdom and the Thailand, you know, the Siam and so on and so forth, we just don't know how far. Possibly not many, but there were significant number of folks which was very much a part of India, especially if you consider Bhima's expedition during Rajasuriya to Yajna to the east, or even Arjuna going, you can start relating to those areas. Right now, with our limited, narrow focus, we tend to think anything in the east is like Assam. Yes, Assam, but we don't have to stop there. The Brahmadesh was very much part of the Indian civilization, and so is the Thailand and Laos, and all the way to Vietnam and Malaysia and Indonesia and so on. But we don't have all the necessary details, but just keep these three areas in mind. All right. Now let's look at something very interesting. Let me repeat my warning to you. Do not, now, if you choose to do, your problem. Do not look at the absolute numbers, because this is modeling. Some initial condition data is used. So that will only take you on the wrong track. But look at the relative changes, okay? For a given region, relative changes over the baseline and relative changes between the different regions of the world. So what do you see here? This is for South Asia. So think of this as for India itself. And notice, again, the x-axis is the axis of time. Okay, so 60,000 years ago, 40,000 years ago, 20,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago. And here is that 5561 BCE, 7,500 years ago. I'm going to mark a timeline there. Where exactly I have marked for a consistency purpose, so that we have an apples to apples comparison, is that line that is going down where it stopped and turned horizontal. Okay, now I could have drawn it before also. Now people say, oh, what is that horizontal line? How come it's not like a sudden sharp decline there like this. Well, it can be, but if you try to ask more questions, basically it tells me, when people ask me that when I give lectures, is that they have zero background of how modeling works, how the data works, why when you draw a model, you may draw you may use different methods, the dots, the straight line, but how do you draw a line between the two empirically actual factual data points? Do you do a straight line? Do you do a convex line, concave line, and so on? That has to go with the modeling. So either you know it, why that is so, or you are not qualified to ask that question. You can go back to this original paper and read it, improve your knowledge so that you understand it. Otherwise, you have to take it on the Shraddha. Okay, certain things. I took this line right where that slope changes and becomes sort of a horizontal, and I'm taking it as a 5561 BC. In fact, it does match as a 5561 BC if you go to original paper. Now, this is for the India itself, where everyone participated, right from the southern tip of India to Kashmir, and to all the way to Assam, to all the way to the Afghanistan, so that. So what happened? This Y chromosome, the male chromosome, experienced a bottleneck. We will see why. And why did that happen, by the way? Remember, 4 million people, and based on the estimates of human population in 6 millennium BCE. And if you take this area, only this area, not the whole world, that amounts to about 80% of the 80% of the male population this is an estimate, of course, 80, but still 80% of the male population of this broader area that I showed you with 1, 2, 3, from the Middle East to India, of course, the dominant people from India, and also from the eastern part of India, 80% of the male disappearing in the 18 days from 16 October to 2nd November 5561 BCE. And what are possibly the effects of that? That's what we are going to look at. Okay, now let's do the comparison on the left side. That is that region 2, the India region. You see that blip here. That is that bottleneck. And actually it stayed there for a long time and finally slowly recovered. Now, when I say it stayed there for a long time and it slowly recovered, if you just look at this one graph, it will not make sense to you. Say, well, okay, I know it went down, then it was going horizontal for some time, and then it recovered. But if you look at relative graphs, so now I'm showing you that same South Asia graph and its comparison with the Near East, which is to say the Middle East. And again, I'm going to draw this line. What do you see? More or less coincident, okay, almost the same time, the Middle East also saw that bottleneck on the Y chromosomes. But notice something, relatively speaking, it recovered much faster than India. Why? Because people from Middle East have participated into the Mahabharata War, but that is not where the Mahabharata War is happening, and therefore not necessarily everyone from the Middle East has participated per se. Okay, that's the one simple explanation. We can go into more complex stuff, and we don't have that luxury right now, or ever for that matter. Now let's look at on the east side. So zone number 3. Again, at the top is the South Asia map. And when I draw this 5561 BCE line, what do you see? Almost coincident, okay? Coincident bottleneck experience in the Southeast Asia also. Not as deep, not as wide as the India itself. Ditto for the Middle East or the Near East, okay? Not as deep, not as wide, and relatively speaking, they recovered faster in comparison to the mainland India itself, where the Mahabharata War took place, and practically everyone participated into the Mahabharata War. Now let's look at few more areas. I'm not going to take you on, I'm going to actually take you through almost all the areas, but not every single area. Okay, now this is going to Europe. Notice something, okay? This is, think of this more as a Western Europe, but also parts of Europe, right? Eastern part of Europe too, but mostly Western Europe. Notice, what do you see? There is an effect of this Y chromosomes bottleneck even in Europe. But do you notice something? Watch the x-axis. That dip in Europe does not start immediately. Rather, it takes some time. Then it begins, and actually it reaches the bottom after a long time, okay, long time after this 5561 BC. Just note it down. I'm going to suggest a plausible reason for it, okay? Now, let's look at this again, same South Asia, which is India, and its comparison with Central Asia. What is Central Asia? Think of this as a Uttara Madra, Uttara Kuru. Not many people, not many kings, not many warriors have participated from that area. Possibly, I said the reason is that the Kuru being the connection with whether Kauravas or Pandavas, and they might have decided to stay neutral. In fact, you don't see many heroes from Uttara Madra, Uttara Kuru. We see Shalya, okay, which is Madra, okay, but not necessarily Uttara Madra, by the way. But you don't see many number of great kings. There must be some. There were some from Uttara Kuru, Uttara Madra, okay. And so now see the effect of that. Okay, I mean, if you understand modeling, forget modeling. If you understand how to connect the data, how to connect the dots, you should get goosebumps here. What do you see? You do have some effect, okay, in terms of the bottleneck, the experiencing of a Y chromosome bottleneck in Central Asia, but notice very similar to Europe. What is it? It is delayed, okay? So the effect of the Mahabharata War, by the time it reached Europe or Central Asia, some time had gone by. And why that is so? We will look at it. Quick answer. This is taken, a signature of this bottleneck is taken by the folks from the greater India migrating to this Central Asia and Europe during the post Mahabharat migrations. So look at the blip. Yes, it is there. It is experienced, but it's not very deep. It's not immediate. And notice something else. It actually kind of did recover, but did not recover per se, but actually it went further down. I'll not go into that. Possibly because the Central Asia as such was not a very hospitable land to begin with. Okay, people always lived everywhere. I mean, people live in Alaska, people live in the, in the extreme area, near the pole. People live in Tierra del Fuego in Argentina, the extreme corner, but not the hospitable land. Similarly, Central Asia is not like that. And it frankly got worse. Okay, so that may be the reason. I don't know what the reason is, but it never recovered per se. Okay, but yes, there is a blip. There is a delayed blip. Just like we saw in Europe, not as sharp as it is seen in Europe, okay, for whatever the reason. Let's look at the one more. Okay, so South Asia is our India, and below that, I'm showing you Andes, which is Latin America. Now, if you look at Mahabharata descriptions, you will know that nobody from Latin America, what we consider today Latin America, South America, I should say, participated into the Mahabharata War. You will see no correlation whatsoever. And please don't try to say, oh, I see a reverse correlation. Okay, well, the reverse correlation is not an issue. Basically, what it is saying is, see, this is a female chromosomes, mtDNA. The light, what is that color? Light pink or pink, okay? And then this yellow is the male chromosome. So basically, they both followed the same thing. Whatever was happening, again, remember, this is a model and it's a relative thing. So they both are going in the same direction. That's why Andes is saying, which is not the case for India itself. Okay, and of course, even as a delayed response to Europe and Central Asia. So here, what do you see? In a way, exactly opposite of what happening in India, but it's not to be seen as opposite. Rather, we are saying, and this was just normal. Both of them, both the male and female chromosomes, their variations or whatnot, they directionally went in the same direction. That's all we can say. Okay, all right, very important to understand this, which is to say, not to read, you have to read the signals, but not to read too much. That basically turns into analysis paralysis. Okay, all right. Now, what are possibly the reasons for that delayed response that we saw in Central Asia, but also in the Europe? And here is one answer. For example, see, this is Caspian Sea. So here we are looking at the area of Iran, and this one is the Black Sea. So we are looking at the area of Turkey, and just below that, the area of Iraq, and so on. So from here, there was this archaeologists have found something called Yamanya culture. And they have a genetic evidence, they have other evidence that Yamanya culture folks migrating to the Europe. Okay, so India, the genetic code from the greater India to that Yamanya to Europe. And of course, the most important thing is what is the timing of it. Okay, well, if you notice the timing based on other people's research, okay, now with that Aryan invasion nonsense, even when these guys write the papers, they will say, oh, by the way, these guys also came to India in 1500 BC, which is a utter nonsense. Okay, there is zero evidence for that. And people should go and look at this evidence for themselves to convince themselves. Okay, genetic evidence exists. I am convinced of it, but you have to go and convince yourself. And also of the fact that whatever these folks who come up with this theory also claiming they coming to India, there is a zero evidence for it. Zero, zilch. Okay, but they would have shown these arrows going in the other direction. But basically, now you see the Yamanya culture here. Okay, these people migrating to Europe. And what is the timeline? Minus 3300 is 3300 BC, 2700 BC, 2500 BC, 2300 BC. That's how, if you look at the Irish gene, okay, Irish gene for the blue eyes, or Irish gene for the gut bacteria that enable milk consumption, like a digestion of cow milk and so on. And that the origin of such mutation occurring in India 7,000 years ago, they say 10,000 years ago, 8,000 years ago, if you read peer-reviewed papers. That connection is through this, that is through post-Mahabharat migration, through Yamanya culture going to Europe. And that's why you see, essentially, they're taking that signature of the bottleneck along with them, okay, to Europe. And that's why you see the signal to Europe is a delayed signal. Quick summary. So warriors from Iraq through East Asia took part in the Mahabharata War. About 4 million men died during the 18-day-long war in 5561 BC. The number 4 million comes from the calculation of 18 Aukshohini, translated into the number of people that comes to about 4 million people. Suddenly, that 4 million people is 80% of the population, male population of this region, suddenly going away in 18 days from 16 October to 2nd November 5561 BC. This number, that 4 million, amounts to estimated 80% of the male of this area. Okay, like 4 million, which is what total male population estimated to be about 5 million, and 4 million are gone. The effect of this exclusive and massive male disintegration resulted in Y chromosome bottleneck, and can be seen in the genetic data for this region, I should say, or these regions, that is regions 1, 2, and 3 that I showed, and in the regions where migrations happen from this region post Mahabharat. Europe is a great example of that. Okay, through Yamanya migration to Central Asia, from the Caspian area and the Black Sea area, and then further west into the Europe, and further north into the Europe. Okay, and it is important to realize the implications of this evidence for the numerous anthropology and migrations theories of the last 300 plus years. Okay, many of them were driven by dogma, driven by agenda, driven by racial superiority, and so on and so forth, driven by agenda not to accept the truth that India, as the civilization seed-giving place for rest of the world, or significant other parts of the world, if not all. Okay, and so based on that, and it's very interesting, if you understand this evidence, if you understand the archaeology evidence that I'm showing you for Dwarka, if you understand the archaeoastronomy evidence, from the Mahabharata, from Ramayana, from Surya Siddhanta, from Aryabhatiya, a beautiful, very impressive, empirical, scientific, logical picture emerges. But guys, my talks are really meant to give you encouragement, to provide you hopefully the spark, and hopefully in a picture catcher style you take it. You don't just listen to this, feel good, clap for me. No, that's not going to do it. It's not going to cut it. We need hundreds and hundreds of researchers. But we need researchers who are serious. I don't want somebody to be very naive and just suddenly become enthusiastic and say, oh, I also want to do some research. In fact, I'll make another episode where I'll say, if somebody wants to, because many people ask for my time, and I do not have that time to give. And I find many of such episodes, actually, when I spend time with individuals, comes out to be a lot of waste. Okay. And I don't want to continue that. So if you want to have my time to discuss some of these things, some ideas that you may have, I have already put this as a condition, but I want to put it somewhere easy for people to understand or read, so that I don't waste my time or my volunteers don't waste time responding to people. That you have to read my 3 books. You have to write a critique of it. Now, by critique, I don't mean you have to agree with it. But you have to, when you agree, you have to explain why you agree. When you disagree, you have to explain why you disagree. And through that, just send me that. It can be written in like 1,000 words, 1,500 words, 3,000 words, 5,000 words, 7,000 words, 10,000 words. You decide. But I need to get that sense that you truly understand. I mean, you are just not naive and just over enthusiastic to do some research, because I realize that I waste a lot of my time, trying to even just communicate, even the first meeting or something. I say, why did I waste time? This person is clueless. It doesn't understand what research is. So my goal is that it creates a spark. You don't have to consult with me. You just guys get excited, build your scientific acumen, build your logical reasoning skills, study Sir Karl Popper's book, study Bhagavad Gita, study Mahabharata, study Ramayana, study Nyaya Darshana, find the toughest unsolved problem, go after it. But if you want my advice, if you want my help, I'm willing to do it. Understand, I'm extremely compressed on my time commitments. But if you want to do it, I want you to read all my books. If I sense that you have not read my books, I don't want to waste my time. Okay. So read my books, write a critique. It can be 1,000 words, it can be 10,000 words, you decide. But it should give me the sense that you understand what research is. Okay. And then let's talk. Until then, please hold your enthusiasm. Okay. Don't be in a hurry to communicate with me. Don't be in a hurry to talk to me. All right. This is supposed to be Dr. No Shorts. I see it's a 40 minutes, just less than 40 minutes. Well, that's how the things are. So I'll not bind myself with these time limits that people keep on telling me. And of course, many others keep on telling me, Nilesh, you just don't worry, just go on as long as you want. Again, my point is, I do not deliberately try to extend this. If I could do it, I would love to do it in like 2 minutes. Okay. Or just not do it at all. Only just write my blogs and my books. That's it. But I'm finding that this one seems to be more interactive medium for individuals. Many people tell me they listen to this when they are driving. So they're not watching, but they are listening. And so please write your comments. So let me know that that's what you guys are doing. And if you're finding this useful, as long as you find it useful, I will continue to do this to the best of my ability. All right. Thank you very much. And I will see you shortly in another session of either Dr. No Shorts, which may not be always short, or Shraddha and Pradnya series. Namaskar.